Welcome to the Peak Performance Podcast. Now, today is going to look a little bit different. I've given my co-host the flick, and I've got two lovely ladies sitting opposite me here today. We've got a really interesting topic to talk about. So whether you suffer from PCOS personally, you know someone who does, you're a female who is interested in exploring how this topic relates to health and exercise, you work in high performance sport, or probably more importantly at a grassroots level, this discussion with Bridget and Velvet is going to be super, super insightful. Although participation by female athletes in competitive sport has increased dramatically, female athletes are represented significantly less than their male counterparts in strength and conditioning or S&C research and literature. Also, the field remains largely male-dominated, with studies showing a significant underrepresentation of women in these roles, particularly in high-level sports. Some of the most recent statistics coming out, it is American data, but indicates that as of 2025, 16.5% of all S&C coaches are female and 83.5% are men. So that just gives you a little bit of background on why this topic and conversation is really important. Bridget is going to share some of her lived experience as an athlete in the sport of field hockey, and Velvet is a PhD candidate in female athlete health and physiology at Flinders University. So with that, I will formally introduce our guest for today, the lovely Bridget Belton, who is an OG here at Peak. We actually looked it up and you are tag number 26. So you're in some of the really small percentage of people that have been with us for a really long period of time. As I mentioned, she's a field hockey player for the Port Adelaide Districts Hockey Club at a Premier League level. She was also awarded MVP for the last season, so she is a GOAT, that's for sure. She also comes from a long line of, sporting prowess in her family. Her dad played for the Old Port Maggies and was just inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is unreal. And you were referred to us through your brother, I think Sean was mentioning, who works as a physio in high performance sport as well. Now, Bridget, as I mentioned, does have PCOS. So we will talk about her experience in that soon. And then we also have the lovely Velvet with us, who, as I mentioned, is a PhD candidate at Flinders University. She also has a strong background in playing and coaching football or soccer. I still can't get my head around calling it football. I'm sorry. So please correct me if you need during the podcast today. She's also involved in lecturing, tutoring and teaching at Flinders University as well. Thanks for coming along, girls. I'm really excited to have you here today.
No, thank you for having us. Very exciting.
Yeah, I like the spiel at the start. I feel like you took my whole spiel.
Oh, no, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I did my research. I wanted to make sure I was representing you girls as well as possible. So maybe let's start with you, Velvet. Could you give us, and I know this is going to be challenging, but give us a bit of an overview of your research, where you're at in your PhD journey, and its benefits for the community.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm at just below the last 6 months at the moment. So I'm on the final streak, which is exciting. I guess my research came about initially doing my honours. I looked at the influence of the menstrual cycle on female athlete health, particularly soccer players. In the women's A-League.
You can call it football if you want.
Yeah. No, that's fine. It's all good. Normally I just say football in brackets, soccer. Yeah. So I feel like in my honours, I looked at the menstrual cycle phases more so. And a lot of people kind of focus on that and how the menstrual cycle affects performance. But a lot of people forget that a lot of female athletes lose their menstrual cycle, or there's things like PCOS and endo as well. And I feel like there's a lot higher percentage of female athletes that are in kind of the irregular cycle phase and whatnot and don't have a regular menstrual cycle. But most people focus on the general effects of the phases, which there's only like a certain amount of athletes, like female athletes, that actually fit into those categories. But my research at the moment kind of transitioned from the phases in my honours going into looking at menstrual dysfunction, and that kind of led me to relative energy deficiency in sport, which is basically when an athlete is not feeling enough for the exercise they're doing, and that it has a range of different health consequences and performance consequences. And I kind of look at more so support staff and how they can help assist in detecting and monitoring that condition so it doesn't get to long-term health effects.
Who, I guess, is responsible for monitoring said condition? I guess I'll be honest, I did a little bit of sneaky research with Kim beforehand, just so I was sort of across this, and we had some discussions around this that, I guess what category does that fall into?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like that's the main focus of my PhD. I feel like
Let's answer that right now.
Yeah.
Solve your whole PhD right now.
Kind of like determining whose job it is to do that monitoring, because it's really multidisciplinary in terms of looking at relative energy deficiency and then also the menstrual cycle in general. Like, it's coming up a lot. The menstrual cycle monitoring should be done and tracking should be done, but no one's really telling practitioners who should be doing that. And unfortunately, there's no real guidance on how to do that and how to discuss it between a team. And if something does come up like relative energy deficiency or an athlete's lost their period, how do you go about talking to that athlete? Who should talk to them? That kind of thing is what my research looks at. And I suppose education and knowledge is very limited. So my thought process is whoever has the best educational background on that area, if they've done further research, should be doing the tracking and monitoring and whatnot. But I do think there's more of a focus in exercise phys and exercise science, and S&C coaches do have a role to play, like in load monitoring, training, monitoring. That's one of their main roles. So I think that they have an important part to roll, and unfortunately they have an important part to play, but unfortunately people kind of think that's just like a dietitian's role to look at the energy balance side of things. But what female athlete really has access to a dietitian or nutritionist consistently throughout their season? Normally they only go and see one if they have something like an eating disorder, which isn't always the case with relative energy deficiency. And nutrition can affect your menstrual cycle in like a range of different ways. I'm sure you've probably looked at PCOS and nutrition and the link between that a little bit, or been advised on it maybe.
It was sort of only really the way that I figured out that I had PCOS was after I had consulted with Belle and done a series of work and sort of come to the point where I chose to go off of the oral pill contraceptive. And then it took me about probably 19 months to get a period back, and that took a fair bit of work to get to that point. Yeah, from when I first figured it out to then first, I guess, getting a cycle back was a really extensive process about trying to figure out what works for me for eating and exercising. And now looking back, I think that the role that it played was huge. I probably completely transformed my body composition in that time as well, from like finally figuring out my cycle and what works for me. I probably would have lost like 6 to 7 kilos, completely changed, I guess, my body composition in the way that like how much more stronger I am now in comparison. And it's funny that you talk about in the strength and conditioning space as well too, because I was involved in like state level hockey programs throughout my whole junior career until I was about 21, where I aged out of the youth competitions. But it wasn't until that point that then I came to this realization, and it was like I was sort of starting again. I had sort of some symptoms, like around my 21st birthday, I had really awful acne, and I was having lots of problems sleeping. And so I'd gone to a series of doctors, and we tried out a couple of things and done some extensive testing. I went on, they put me on some like insulin tablets, but my body had like an adverse reaction to that. So chose to get rid of, I guess, that method of trying to sort of level things out and just ride the wave and wait for it to eventually come good itself. And I've been really lucky that it has sort of leveled itself out. I still have periods where I will be like really fatigued. And if I notice that I'm not being as attentive to my nutrition, that it had a pretty big impact, not only just in my sport, but like my work, general fatigue, brain fog, stuff like that.
So how long, Bridge, would you say from when you noticed the symptoms, I guess, or how it was affecting you to when you actually received a diagnosis? How long was that period, and at what age? And at what age were you at?
Well, I'm trying to think about my age now. I was probably around 22, 23, and it would have taken 12 months. Yeah.
And is that common, Velvet, that you see or have heard that there's quite a long time period to receive a diagnosis or support or help or understanding about what's actually going on for the female?
Yeah, like the diagnosis. I'm not sure particularly about PCOS, but I know for endo, like the average time, like there's something crazy like over 10 years before someone, like when they first approach a doctor to when they get a diagnosis. And I would actually really like to hear about your experience with if you first went to a doctor about your symptoms and then they just put you on the pill, because a massive thing that really frustrates me is like people using, and GPs that obviously have so much that they need to know and be aware of, and the actually scope of education that they get on like general female health or women's health is really small. And even I've had problems with my menstrual cycle, and I've been referred to a gynecologist, and the first thing they said was to go on the pill. And I'm like, no, but like trying to advocate for myself, and for me, who's done research in this area, and I'm advocating for myself, I can't imagine how someone who doesn't have that educational background, who doesn't feel confident advocating for themselves would feel. So it's actually really common that an athlete, or even just a woman in general who is active or not active, will just get referred straight onto the pill. And it's really just a band-aid effect, because what happens, and not a lot of people are aware of it, but when you go on the pill, if we're talking about a hormonal pill, what actually happens is it suppresses your natural hormones and then gives you artificial ones. So you don't actually have a normal menstrual cycle. You're getting, you still get the shedding of the lining of the uterus, and that's what causes a bleed, but there's no actual ovulation that's occurring. So that's really what happens, and it has different effects, which a lot of people forget. If they're new to kind of menstrual cycle monitoring with our athletes, they'll just bunch everyone into one category, and they don't think about things like endo, if the athlete's on a pill, if they have PCOS, and even if you are not on the pill or any form of contraception, hormonal contraception, if you don't have a specific disorder, some athletes will still have a normal bleed, but they won't have ovulation occurring anyway, so they'll have an anovulatory cycle. So that's another thing to think about too.
And as you mentioned, you know, if you someone who yourself who has lived experience and educational background in it are having to push to advocate for yourself still, someone who maybe might not be as well equipped to have that knowledge, if they're having that experience with GPs. And the stats I quoted before about strength and conditioning and elite sport, that it is quite male dominated. I can only imagine trying to broach that topic in a high performance setting could be really overwhelming, and maybe even lead to a lot of girls just going, oh, I'm not going to mention it, and it's probably in the too hard basket and I'll just suffer and put up with it. Bridge, what's your sort of experience been in trying to perform at your best and highest level, and your journey in sport?
Well, it's always a bit funny to reflect on it now, actually, because, you know, I'd always quite a good, young athlete coming up through the ranks, but I wouldn't have thought that I would have reached my peak performance until probably the last 4 or so years, and that's after the fact. And I was exposed to those high performance industries or teams, and I was making those teams, but because I obviously wasn't functioning at my peak then, or I was facing all of these problems which were masked in different ways, that I actually hadn't really fully reached my potential yet. And so it hasn't really been until the last couple of years where I felt my best.
How did you feel in those high performance environments? Did you maybe just, you didn't have the awareness for yourself of what was going on, or do you think that the environment that you were in, like nobody brought anything up to you or said, hey, maybe is something else going on?
Yeah, well, it probably just wasn't really an open discussion, to be honest. Like you said, that it, especially when I was younger, there definitely wasn't something that they would discuss that openly. But unfortunately, field hockey is a pretty limited funded sport anyway. So even at the high levels of those state levels, we weren't really able to access those. And it wasn't until I became an adult and I made those decisions myself to reach out to people like Belle and you guys, that was able to be taken into my own hands. And I probably just wasn't really exposed to the strength and conditioning proper training either. Like you go and you like flog yourself on the hockey field or in running, and it actually that wasn't what was best for my body. And it hasn't been until that I've implemented those things that I've reached like my peak. Well, hopefully not fully yet, but
That's exciting though for you. Like, obviously not great that you've had to go through that journey and of improving your health, but for you now, hopefully you've got those tools and understanding of your own body that can lead you into some pretty exciting years. If you got MVP last year, what's next, Bridge? Hey? I guess moving forward from this conversation, Velvet, Bridget made a really good point there about lowly funded sports, and our motto here is closing that gap between local and elite. It's great to hear that this research is getting done and there is more information coming out. However, generally a lot of that education and research reaches the people at the top of their game in high performance sport. Their staff are going to PD days or upskilling. At that more grassroots level or lowly funded level, how on earth do we get this information out? How can we create improvements for females in maybe sports that are more lowly funded?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's probably people that have come before me that have tried to tackle it. There's a range of different things that can be done. And people like Bridget come on a podcast and talk about her experience is one thing that you can do, but really giving female athletes a voice. I know we're really fighting for the funding at the moment, but there's only so much you can do. Like, it really comes down to the policy level, and also not just talking about it, but actually having action occurring. Like, if I relate it back to the menstrual cycle tracking side of things, and speaking to elite athletes, and even just athletes a sub-elite level, there's a lot of tracking going on and then nothing occurring from it. So we're taking good steps in the right direction, and I'm sure at a grassroots level just discussing the menstrual cycle with your athletes is a good step, but it's really hard when the research is really in the early stages as well. So, having the research being done is a good step. And then also people translating that research into education. And unfortunately, I feel like there's not a lot of funding in women's sports. So people who do have that education, like myself, I try and get out to sporting clubs and do stuff where I can for free, because the people that need it the most can't pay for it a lot of the time. So, if you have the educational background, I know we don't want to do things for free, but it's going to end up in the long run being better for women's sport.
And creating that snowball effect, right? Hopefully if one person's listening to this, hopefully all of our coaches are listening to this. I'll make it mandatory to do so. That, if one S&C, male S&C coach in particular, takes that information and then can apply it to their practice or ask questions or reach out to you or does a bit more research, then that has a snowball effect onto the coach that they're working with or one of the athletes that they're working with and can tell a friend. And I think, that snowball effect organically is really, really important as well.
Yeah, I think as well, men being involved, like, for example, the reason that, I suppose in soccer specifically, I'm not too sure about different sports, but the reason women's soccer, football, whatever you want to call it, is at a lower level than men's soccer at the moment is because men stopped women playing for years when they first started playing. So I really want men to question why it's women's job to solve an issue that men caused in the first place. Men have a role to play in, improving women's sport, whether it's just talking to, a male in the change room if they make a sexist comment, or whether it's talking to your female athlete about the menstrual cycle. It's like very small things that you can do that will make female athletes' lives better. Like just get out and watch women's sport, for example. You don't have to compare the two. It's not men's sport and women's sport. If you love a sport, why would you not be happy there's an additional game to watch?
Well, and it's a realistic part of the athlete that they're working with, right? If their job is to improve performance, and this is another aspect to do with their performance, then it's very, very relevant. You know, they would read up on someone does their ACL and rehab, and how can we make sure that we're supporting that person through their rehab as best as possible, and what other professionals can we pull in to make sure that we're supporting them, psych, physio, EP, S&C, nutrition. That conversation just doesn't happen for female athletes in relation to the menstrual cycle. It is definitely moving forward, but as you said, there's a long way to go. So yeah, it's just another aspect of performance for female athletes. So it seems like a bit of a no-brainer to invest in research and understand in it for coaches and all supporting staff. I want to flip the conversation a little bit, because I know, you know, we've been talking about some of the maybe more negative effects and roadblocks that it brings about. But what's some positives about the menstrual cycle and training, and how can we make sure that we are training, fueling in a way to actually get benefits from certain phases of our cycle?
I think like what you said before, from like the fact, what I was most shocked with when I first tried to get a grip of what was going on, was that I was seriously under-fueling myself. And it wasn't until I started, you know, working with Belle, and when she first sent me my first plan, I was like staggered. That's a lot of food. And she's like, yeah, you need that much food. And so it wasn't until I was properly fueling, you know, like it sounds obvious, but the appropriate amount of fats and protein and the carbs at appropriate times, and especially around like my games, and making sure that's like optimal for your performance for the game, that I realized like, wow, probably over the last couple of years I've been really underfueling myself, and no wonder that's, you know, impacting your fatigue and your cycle itself. But yeah, it blew my mind with how much you could eat, or you have to eat, in order to be able to function properly.
Yeah, I think just touching on that, it's so important to work with a nutritionist, and I can't advocate for Belle more. Like if you're a female athlete working with her, like we've got our own business together. I've done my part in educating her. She's done her own research in terms of nutrition specific effects around the menstrual cycle, and she really understands like the holistic approach with female athletes. And as you mentioned, the whole fueling side of things, I think one of the great things about the menstrual cycle is it is such an easy way to find out what your health is like. For example, if you're not fueling properly, then a lot of athletes will lose their menstrual cycle, and that has a range of different effects. Like an athlete that doesn't have their period is 2 to 4 times more likely to get a stress fracture than an athlete that does have their menstrual cycle. They're also at a really high risk of early onset osteoporosis. So I know there's a range of negative effects of losing your menstrual cycle, but it's such an easy indicator to identify where your health is at. If you're having a natural menstrual cycle that's occurring, and only a small percentage of women actually have a 28-day cycle. I think it's something like 7% of women have a 28 regular day cycle. So if you're having what's a normal cycle for you that's occurring consistently, then you know that what you're doing, you're fueling properly, what you're doing is a good indicator of your health. That's really important.
Yeah. I want to finish on asking you both the same question. With the podcast, we like to leave everybody with some little golden nuggets or some information that if they take one thing away from this, that they can implement or research or go further with. I'd like to know just what's, in terms of Bridget, your lived experience, and Velvet, in terms of your lived experience plus, I guess, your research. What is some advice you can give to female athletes who maybe are struggling with PCOS or struggling with REDs, interested in health, wellbeing, maybe it's performance and sport? What's some advice you could give if they're experiencing similar things?
I think for me personally, I'm, you know, a pretty open book, so it's never really been a problem for me with, I would hate to toot his horn, but with bakes, we've always been pretty...
He gets a look in even when he's not here.
But we've always been pretty open and honest, but then having those conversations with people, it just makes, you know, things so much easier moving forward in terms of changing your exercise regime or whatever that may be. And I think it's still something that I personally probably haven't really nailed on the head yet either, but being really like gentle with yourself and aware of when, you know, maybe you can give it a little bit more of a push and you can push yourself a bit harder, and those times where no, you're actually probably a little bit fatigued right now, it would be best to do something that's a little bit less intense, and there's nothing wrong with that. And you know, you're not going to lose fitness, or there's not going to be this massive impact that has on it. You really need to work with your body to be able to reach like your potential, I guess.
Yep. And maybe if people don't feel as comfortable and open as you do you have any suggestions around pathways to go down? I know you said that reaching out to Belle was one of the first big indicators for you to go, oh, there is actually something happening here.
Yeah, that was huge. I think that like starting my work with Belle was really just a total turning point in my whole strength and conditioning aspect of my sport and life. So reaching out to those people that I guess you would feel comfortable talking to. But the internet is also a somewhat pretty wonderful place at the moment as well. I had to do a lot of research myself, and there is, you know, starting to be a lot more out there that you can educate yourself on to be able to feel a little bit more empowered about, you know, what those next steps would look like for each individual.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, I guess education is power, right?
Yeah.
The more knowledge you have, and as Velvet was talking about being able to advocate for yourself, arming yourself with some of those tools in your tool belt. I'm sure I haven't experienced it personally, but that you'll still come against resistance, but at least you've got some stuff to fall back on.
Yeah, and just like not dismissing what's going on in your own body either. Like I think that, you know, you said a lot of people think, oh yeah, you're pretty active, it makes sense not to get a menstrual cycle, and you know, that wasn't really the case for me. So, or, you know, for others, but yeah, don't dismiss what's going on as just, you know, something that happens.
Yeah, I'm just a bit tired,
Yeah,
or I'll
yeah.
put up with that pain.
And you know, sometimes you are just a bit tired,
Yeah.
but I get that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can take your
Investigate
health.
it.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. And what
Yeah.
about for you?
I feel like I'm gonna hype Belle up again. I feel like
She deserves it. Our wonderful girl at AB Performance Nutrition. She deserves it.
yeah, I mean, reaching out and finding practitioners that actually care about women's health. Like, there's a really unfortunate influx at the moment on particularly social media of people jumping on the bandwagon of women's health in sport, and they read one journal article or they find some blog or something, and then they start posting about it and they act like they know everything about it and they can help you get your period back and regulate your cycle and give you all these supplements and whatnot. But with Belle, she obviously actually cares, and I've worked with her and she knows what she's talking about. So working with practitioners that actually care about you as an individual, because the menstrual cycle and women's health is so individualized. Even things as simple as menstrual symptoms are very different in different individuals. So I think finding practitioners that actually care about you and don't care about just getting more clients and wanting more money is really important, because obviously women's sport, as it increases, is a market. And then secondly, advocating for yourself, like I've already mentioned. It's really hard to tell as a female athlete what's normal and what's not, because you only know your experience. So sitting down and talking to, it doesn't have to be your coaches, but your friends. That's where I started. I started talking to my teammates about it, and then realizing, oh, it's not normal that I only get a period every 3 months, or I didn't get a period at all last year, or my cramps are so bad I don't want to go to training, that type of thing. So just talking to your friends, your teammates about it. And you never know, you talking about it might make someone else more comfortable and actually make them take the next step to go and reach out to a professional about it.
Oh, girl, this has been amazing. I want to say a big thank you to both of you for taking your time out of the day and sharing your experiences, your knowledge, your research. I think it's such a crucial topic, as I mentioned, for athletes who have families, parents, sisters, brothers who have friends who experience this, coaches, S&C coaches, physios, everyone. If you're working with a female in the sport industry, in the health and fitness industry, it's really important. I'm talking to you now. Take the time out, as you've heard the girls say, to learn, listen, do the research, support. It's a really, really important topic that has a big impact on not only performance, but people's wellbeing and health. So thank you so much for sharing today. It's been a pleasure to have you in.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No, thank you for bringing this conversation to your podcast, and obviously thank you for people listening. Like, that's taking one good step in the right direction.
There we have it. What an amazing, honest, informative and educational episode from Bridget and Velvet. I think the two big key takeaways from this episode were really advocating for yourself and taking your health seriously. And then secondly, seeking that expert help from professionals who are going to put you first and are going to give you that individualized approach to your health and performance.